Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malaman, Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me, my good friends, are Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky of Anshe Chesed in New York City. We're recording this on day 349 of the war,
Mm.
remembering the hostages, thinking about them first and foremost, and thinking about all the people that are in this moment of metach, this moment of tension in Israel, with all the events going on this week, these unbelievable events and things that are unfolding, probably even as we are recording this, um,
And
and
we
thinking
send our
about
salute.
everybody.
We send our salute to the newest Israeli.
Absolutely. Elisheva, she just got her Teudat Zehut today, so we're very proud of her. Mazal Tov to her.
And
Um,
I was at the we were talking about this before we started recording. I was at the Ishai Ribo concert. It was an amazing celebration of hope and affirmation, and Omer Nutra's parents were there, and they were shown on the camera on the jumbotron there, and just think about the just unending agony that family's going through, and wish them release.
so this is a good way to start. I'm sorry to always look at the dark side, but
You want it darker?
I do it with a
There's
certain
a
kind of bright.
great article about Leonard Cohen in the Atlantic this month. Really, really good
I'll have to
article.
take a look at it. Vaya Ki Tavo, when you come into the land. And so that's our parsha, which is, of course, an amazing parsha. Vaya Ki Tavo el haaretz. This is it. The big speeches are over. And now we're talking about things that happen when you come into land. So on the one hand, we've been talking all these weeks of Sefer Dvarim, of listening to long, long speeches, and now we go, okay, here we are. Ki tavo el haaretz asher Adonai le'echa noten lecha nechala. Here you're going to go into the land that God has given to you. V'rishta v'yashavta ba, and you're going to dwell in it, and you're going to inherit it, and you're going to plant whatever you plant. V'lakachta mereshit kol pri adama, and it's just, you take the first of all your fruits, all the produce of the land, the asher tavim me'aretzecha, that you bring out of your land, asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach, that God is giving you. V'samta v'atena, you put it in a little basket, and we get this kind of little romantic picture here, that here's a farmer that's taking wheat and barley or whatever, tomatoes. I don't know, not really tomatoes, but the fruits of the land. You know what I mean? Putting it in uh, a
The
basket,
yeah.
and celebrating it. And this is just normal. And I have to quote Rabbi Benny Lau here. I was listening to his Parsha talk from a couple of years ago. He says, this gives you the picture of normalcy, but there's nothing normal about this people. And in a way, here we have a normal celebration, a normal ceremony in a kind of, in a mythological or maybe mythic circumstance where everybody's at peace, and you get to bring your first fruits to the temple and then offer this declaration. And I just find this to be, it's elevating. It's enlivening in some ways. It's a declaration. So let me ask you just the kind of low-hanging fruit question, which is, what's the purpose of this? What's the purpose of this declaration? And what's the purpose of what he says? And maybe you can, quote a few words of what he says, because it's maybe familiar to our viewers and listeners from certain other ceremonies that take place in the Jewish calendar. So I'm going to turn to you, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky. Take us into this text. And I mean it not in a facetious way, but I really want to live inside this text for a bit. I really want to experience this.
Let me call this up for a second, just real quick. Go back to it on my electronic. And I must say, I do appreciate that you referred to this as the low-hanging fruit.
Okay.
Because that's it. This is the first fruits. So the person comes and they bring those low-hanging fruits, and they go to the priest, and they say, "Higati hayom ladunai Elohecha." I'm now going to tell God, who presumably knows this, but I'm just going to clarify it, that I have in fact come to the land, and as you told us to, and then the priest takes the basket, and ve'anita ve'amarta, which is a biblical phrase, which means you shall proclaim. It's a kind of a ritual recitation. Before the Lord your God. Aramio ve'ravi vayered mitzrayma vayagor sham bimtema'at vayihisham legoy gadol atzum varav. This, which in the context of Deuteronomy 26 over here, is a Shavuot holiday. That's the day of the first fruits. But we recite those lines. My father was a wandering Aramean. He went down to Egypt with a few numbers and sojourned there. But there he became a great nation, mighty and numerous. And then people usually have a commentary in which they say, when do we eat? Because this is the Passover Seder, of course, is built around this declaration, which in the context of Deuteronomy is a Shavuot celebration of first fruits. What it has become in Jewish community is the recitation of a history of exile and suffering, being in Egypt and the metaphorical Egypts in which Vayareu otanu hamitzrim, the Egyptians and all their various successors have done evil to us, or in the beautiful midrashic tweak that some of the Haggadah gives us, they made us seem evil, Vayanunu, and they oppressed us, Vayitnu aleinu avodah kasha, and they gave us such hard labor, V'nitzak el Adonai, and that turns the other way. And then we cried out to the Lord, Elohei Avotenu, the God of our ancestors, Vayishma Adonai et kolenu, and God heard us, Vayarat onyenu, and saw our suffering, V'et amalenu v'et lachatzenu, and all of the difficulty and misery and oppression, everything that we had. Vayotzienu Adonai miMitzrayim, biyad chazaka v'zuran tuyah, uv'mora gadol v'otot muftim. And God took us out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm with great signs and wonders and all kinds of miracles. And it just feels like the spring when I say these words.
Then get to the climax. You brought us here via Venu.
And here's the climax here in Deuteronomy 26, and brought us to this place, and gave us this land, which is, of all things, of course, Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. It's flowing with milk and honey.
And now, Vata hineheveti.
And so you brought me here, and so I've done what I said I was going to do, what you told me to do, which is to bring the first fruits of this land which you have given me, and here I am, and you bow down and worship.
So I find this is an amazing passage. It's an amazing passage. I count the words, there's 73 words. And as I love to do, I like to always kind of find the midpoint. It's not exactly the midpoint of this text, but the text seems to be divided in everything before Yetziat Mitzrayim and everything after Yetziat Mitzrayim. The Yetziat Mitzrayim obviously is the turning point of the whole story. And what's so amazing is that this pilgrim, this farmer, is living, who knows how many dozens, hundreds of years afterwards. This is, what Moses is imagining. Maybe it's next year, maybe it's, in a decade from now, you'll be coming to the place that God chooses. Maybe it's, a half a century or more. The temple in Jerusalem is not built for several hundred years. So we're imagining an idyllic picture where some pilgrim farmer is coming, and he has to say, he personalizes all of Jewish history, and every single one tells the same story. And that's the kind of point here, is that we all share this story. And so here's the question I want to ask, which is, do we as a Jewish people have one story? I mean, that may be the sermon here.
So I think we could go in a number of different directions. And obviously, on one level, we don't have one story, because as Jeremy mentioned, the biblical story is one of Shavuot, which is an agricultural holiday here. And the other place for this story is Pesach, which is a historical holiday in the spring. And I think that one of the things that struck me listening to Jeremy go through so lovingly this story is that we have three festivals, Pesach, or Matzot, Shavuot, and Sukkot, which began as agricultural holidays and then became historical holidays. And the question that is raised by this process is, what really is the most important part of the story? Is it the Exodus? Is it Revelation? Or is it Sukkot, the wilderness period? And I think that the verses here harken back to the original promise of God in Exodus chapter 6, which provides the verses which give the rise to the four cups of the Pesach Seder, the four cups of wine, with the fifth word being bringing you into the land. And we can't get to the land without the Exodus. I was struck, Elliot, that I would imagine the first person who made this brought his first fruits, and the generation that came over with Joshua. What a great amount of excitement, because now we're in the land, and this is the first fulfillment of God's promise of what he will do to us in the land. And it's the first fruits. It's not the final harvest, because this ritual points to the future, not just to the immediate past where I've been successful with my crops.
Right. But here is this pilgrim who it did not experience the Exodus by himself, uh, and is living past that. And and I guess the technical language of this, he's locating himself in a continuum of history, which is what I think, all ritual or all ceremony does. There is a sense of narrative here. There's a sense of storytelling. There's a sense of who am I, what is my story, and where do I belong? And how did I get here? How did I get to this place? And so part of what's going on here is a statement that says you didn't get here on your own. You may think you got here on your own, but you got here as a consequence of, you know, major historical events that no, not only go back to the Exodus, but they go back to your ancestors. And so you are in some way, you're not only connected to Vayotzianim and Mitzrayim, but you are connected to Arami Oved Avi.
Because this
Right.
is not only a national story, it's a family story.
And it's your family, it's your personal story.
Exactly.
Exactly. And so, what we're taking, we're telling this individual, you're not yourself. Yourself is made up of a larger story. And I'm wondering if that is a message that resonates with contemporary Jews, that you are part of a larger story. And to what extent Jews understand themselves as being a part of a story, to what extent that category, story, really is the operative category today. I was at the Hartman Institute this summer, and we talked a lot about this. And listening throughout the year to all these different podcasts, I listened to the Dan Senor podcast, Call Me Back, and the Yossi Klein Levi with Daniel Hartman podcast. I recommend them all. They're wonderful, and they talk about the story, and that here is the Jewish story, and that we can condense it almost in a contemporary Arami Oved Avi story, the modern story, the story of modern Israel. I don't know if we would all come to an agreement on that story, but there is a narrative here that we share, and so it's a people is defined by its story, and by extension, the politics of it is that a leader has to embody that story in a sense, I think. I don't know if you have.
You asked the degree to which this resonates. I mean, listen, there are many wonderful things about being an American Jew. But one of the great challenges in this extremely individualist country is, is to find the meaning of your personal life in a collective narrative. As a Jew, that's just coin of the realm. There's nothing else. You have to feel that your individual story is knit into the experience of this people, and you can't be who you are without membership in this collective. But in American life, I think, you know, we typically do privilege everybody's own individual story. You know, more than that, you know, meaning making by integration, which I think is at our loss.
Well, we can contribute to the story. You know, where Micha Goodman, the Israeli philosopher, says Jews, Israelis have a big story and a small stage. In a small country, big story. Small country, big story, he says. Americans, big country, big story, right? Small country, big story means that you think you can impact that story. If you're a person in that country, you can impact that story. Big country, big story means that, you know, there are 350 million people in this country. It's very difficult to make an impact on this story here, you know.
Well, I think part of the problem in America today is that we don't have a big story. We have a lot of small stories. And I think that is something that Jeremy was suggesting in his earlier comment. And what we would benefit from here in America would be a greater sense of a greater story to which we all belong.
Right. Well,
Rather than
I'm sorry to interrupt. That's the job of a leader. There's a psychologist, I don't know if he's still alive, Howard Gardner. He wrote the purpose of a leader is to narrate the story. You know, ultimately the leader does narrate that story, and the people have to kind of resonate with that story. And you know, we'll leave aside the politics of this moment, other than to say that would that we would have that, and would that you know the people could resonate with that, and that's where I think there's strong yearning.
Yeah, but
Uh,
here we call up, you know, the poem of William Butler Yeats, The Second Coming. The best lack all conviction, and the worst are full of passionate intensity. There is a public leader in this country who tells a story that grabs millions of his fellow Americans by the heart and expresses their deepest held convictions. It's just a terrible story.
well,
And
so with that, you know what? Let's hold that.
okay.
Because unless you want to give a kind of last moment there, because I want to go to another verse in the parsha, which
I just want to add one other piece to this. That this story here in Ki Tavo, the first fruits, is a story of redemption, but it's not the redemption that we're used to thinking about. We tend to identify redemption with the holiday of Pesach, and the paradigm of redemption for the rabbi certainly was Kriyat Yam Suf, which is a culmination of the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, which is the Exodus story. But I was struck that the land is described as a land of milk and honey.
yeah.
And the question it raises is that the land that they found or the land that they made? And I get the sense that the farmer who brings the first fruits realizes now with his fruit in front of him that he is a participant in redemption. The Exodus in some ways was a passive act. It did require a lot of walking, I grant you, but the way it's described in the Torah, it was something that God did for us, for Bnei Yisrael. The agriculture in the land of Israel is something that requires the Israelite, the human being, to make it happen. God is not enough. God could take us out of Egypt, but he cannot build up the land. That requires the Israelite. And so we have a sense here of the beginning, you know, that phrase, Reshit Smichat Gulatenu, the beginning of the flowering of our redemption, with the beginning of the flowering of our harvest in the early summer.
I just want to comment that and relate. I my first trip to Israel was in 1978. I went on Ramah seminar. I'll never forget. We went to a place called Neot Ktumim, which is actually quite an important, you know, place to visit now. It was just starting out then. It's called the Biblical Nature Reserve, and so the person that took us around was a very, you know, important expert on Bible and nature. And he explained Zavat Chalav Udvash as follows, and I'll never forget. He said Zavat Chalav Udvash is meadows, right? Bees and meadows. It's the idea that the land flows with honey means that there are lots and lots of meadows where bees are flourishing and producing honey. Chalav is grazing animals, animals that are your pasture animals, like your sheep or your goats, maybe your cows. Okay, and they're producing all of this. But that's a very primary level of cultivation. The advanced cultivation is, fields that you plant and orchards that you plant with fruits that are abundant, that are not wild, and these luxurious fruits that we've already encountered in the book of Deuteronomy, your pomegranate, your olives, your dates, these are your figs, these are important and luxurious fruits, your vines, and that requires the cultivation. And so you've entered Eretz Zavat Chalav U'Dvash, right? Verse 9. You came into this land, and he gave us this land, Eretz Zavat Chalav U'Dvash, a land flowing with milk and honey in its primitive state. V'ata, and now, look what I've done. I've cultivated orchards, I've brought fields, I've had a harvest. The land is much more than a land flowing with milk and honey. The land is filled with all sorts of abundant things. And when I think about modern Israel, I always tell people my favorite thing about Israel, jokingly, is cherry tomatoes. It's just like the best ever, the sweetest. Right? No, it's like
Have you ever had in Israel a fig right off the tree?
exactly. No, so things are
There's
just a little
nothing in the
tastier.
world like a fig right off the tree.
The food, we get rhapsodic about this, but it just tastes better. Everything just tastes better.
I mean, I
And
one time was in California. Actually,
yeah,
the summer I worked at Brandeis Bardeen camp
right. That too, I'm
on an
told.
orange tree, and picked up an orange off the tree that summer. The freshness was amazing, but it was also been in the sun. It was hot. It was like I was eating a baked orange. It
Okay,
was the sweetness. There's no words.
there's no
So
words.
I remember when I was in a grapefruit tree orchard when I first got to Israel in 1973. And I think we were harvesting the grapefruit. I had 11 right off the tree, and because they're so fresh, you could eat that many and not be affected by them.
Right. So there's something about cultivation. Okay,
But by the way, just so one
right.
thing in the Talmud, uh, there's a lovely story you had about the difference between a meadow and an agricultural field. But I'm looking for it here in Ketubot. It's right at the end. I can't find it right this second. But the line of the Eretz Zavat Chalav U'Dvash, there's a image of Dvash is, despite what that fellow said, is probably really date honey, like just the syrup, like silan, the syrup made out of dates. There's an image recited in the Gemara in Ketubot that the guy goes and he sees a goat with its face in a pile of dates and its udders leaking milk. And he said, "This is Zavat Chalav U'Dvash." It literally flows. The dates are dripping syrup. The goat is dripping milk, and the sort of almost erotic liveliness of that is an amazing image.
Wow, I don't even want to go to the end of the parsha now, which is
Well, no, you have to because
I have
because
to.
because we're talking about all this beautiful stuff, and there's
Okay, so we
difficult
know that the
stuff.
parsha contains what we call the tochacha, the blessings and curses. The tochacha, the curses, terrible things that will happen if you don't keep the mitzvot. We don't, it's so long, and it's so hard to. I have to say, I read it. I literally get so emotional reading it. It's so painful. It's painful to read, especially in a year in which there's been just so much suffering, so much pain, so much anguish, so much catastrophe. um and the person that has to deal with catastrophe, I'm going to go right to the end, the third last verse of it, verse 67, in which there's such exasperation. This is what will happen to you if you don't keep the mitzvah. Baboker tomar mi iten erev. In the morning, someone will say, would it be, who will give us evening? Uva erev tomar mi iten boker. And at night, someone will say, let it be morning. Mipachad levavcha, from the fear in your heart, asher tifchad mimare enecha, that you will fear from what you see with your eyes, asher tir'eh. I want to stop there. I want to say I can't read this. It's so difficult. And I say I make this kind of mental leap and say I go inside this text, and I understand this. I understand that there are people who experience life so deeply and who have been, you know, for whom life has been so chaotic and so tragic that they can't they can't relate to time. Now, there's an interesting. I mean, here's where the joy comes. If you imagine, there's a machloket about this. The machloket is what are we saying? In the morning, someone says let it be evening. In the evening, someone says let it be morning. So are they referring to let it be yesterday evening, or are they referring to let it be tonight? And this happens to be a debate between two of the commentators. We'll go with Rashi and we'll go with Rashbam. I don't know if you have it queued up there,
Yeah, I
Jeremy.
do.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So Rashi says um, that would in the morning you say wish that it were evening, meaning I wish it were yesterday. Um, I wish it were last night. And in the morning, in the evening, I would say I wish it were the morning. Um, of the next dawn.
No. The morning, it was the previous morning. In other
The
words,
previous morning,
the
he just
person
gives
who
two
is
previous.
exasperated is looking backwards. He's saying it was better. It was better.
Okay, so I wish it was better. I wish it was last night, or I wish it was yesterday morning. Shehatzarot mitchazkot tamid, because
Yeah,
everything always
wow.
gets worse.
It gets
E-
worse.
Everything, and v'kol sha'a meruba kilalata mi shelifaneha, and
Oh,
every moment is a more cursed than the one before that.
it's so pain. I just like, stop. You know, everything's getting worse. So last night was better than this morning, and this morning is better than tonight. That's just awful, right? So now Rashbam.
It is just awful. I mean, it's like, it's some Jewish depression going on here.
Well, it is. It makes you cry. But Rashbam, says it
Lefi
differently.
Pshat, Lefi Pshat, Ha'erev Ha'atid Lavo. I wish, I wish that in the morning you say, I wish that it were evening, meaning I wish it was tomorrow evening, because because Shekem Derech HaCholim, because that's how sick people feel. When is this thing going to end? Ad matai, that's in the Psalms of Lament, that's the key phrase. Ad matai, how much longer can this go on? Wish that it would be tomorrow already. So the Rashbam, who is the grandson of Rashi, uh, seems to be saying, the Rashi is like just doubling, tripling down on despair. Everything only gets worse. The Rashbam at least has some measure of this is going to get better sooner or later. I wish it were tomorrow.
Right. So this is our dilemma, which is, so I want to be the ancient person who I want to be Rashi, who probably understood a little bit of suffering, and he's channeling the midrashic tradition here, no question about that. And he's saying the midrashic tradition is it gets worse before it gets worse. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse, and because it's going to get worse, we're going to pine away for what was. We're going to be kind of nostalgic. And Rashbam is saying, no, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. And you know what? We are split souls. I don't think that we are entirely in one place, and I don't think we're entirely in another place as Jews. I don't know. Maybe there are some days where I say, look, it's only going to get better, and that's it. We got to look forward. We got to be hope, etc., etc. And there's some days where I say, look, you know what? Reality is things are not easy. Things are going to get very, very difficult.
This year there's this year there's a poem by the poet Chaim Guri, which is on everybody's lips, at least this one line. Um, uh, and now I want to call it up, make sure I get it right. The lines on everybody's lips is, he says, Mashlomcha, everyone asks Mashlomcha, and he says, Shlomi kishlom ami.
Shlomi
my
Kishlama me. Yeah,
my you know, how I'm only as well as my people. But
yeah.
the poem concludes, and he says, when I say that, I say that to people on the street, and they kind of groan as if we're shutafim latzara. And then he says, Yihiyeh tov, and I forget exactly how the poem ends, but the last line is Kebal sodo shel hamashiach. Yihiyeh tov ani mavtiach, keish sodo shel hamashiach, or something like that. I promise you it's going to be okay, as if I am the Mashiach's confidant. Like the tension of that poem is so great. I tell you it's going to be okay, as if I really know.
Right. Okay. So
So this brings us back to this ritual. So, you said you found this hard to read, the blessings and the curses, but originally they were staged, right? We have to imagine, I think, a great event with half the people on one mountain, the other half the people on the other mountain, depending on which tradition you think is most accurate. Half the people are proclaiming blessings, and half the people are proclaiming curses, because the truth of the matter is we don't know what's going to be. And I think that it's always easier to make the curses more stark than the blessings more beautiful. And what I imagine is that the people have come into the land, and now they realize they have to make choices. They have to make choices as individuals and choices as a people, and there are consequences. And while any individual may not have a great effect on what happens, it takes everyone together to make the future happen. And the last thing I would say in this regard is that sometimes the future seems clearer than the present. And so this gives us a certain direction. We can hear the blessings, we can hear the curses, and it could motivate us, as I said earlier in the book, to choose life and to choose the blessings and reject the curses.
all right. So here this is a longer conversation, but I can't end without thinking, you know, we're approaching the high holidays, and we're thinking about this year. This is a pivotal year in Israel's history. It's a pivotal year in Jewish history. And in some ways we're looking back at a year, and we're looking back at October the 6th, and we're looking back at October the 8th. And to a certain extent, it's like there is a part of me. We all remember that morning, and I remember the day before. I mean, things seemed to be, beautiful. Things seemed to be that we were just finishing, Sukkot. It was at the end of Sukkot, and the weather in Israel was wonderful, and we were having, beautiful, beautiful holiday. And I almost want to say, would that we could freeze that world. Would that we could freeze October 6th. And there were plenty of problems, of course, but would that we could kind of stay there. And then, of course, this catastrophe happened, and it's like ba'erev mi'iten boker, boker mi'iten erev. It's been one horror show, for especially for the families, especially for the people of loss, especially for all the destruction. And is it going to get better? And of course, we're in days of tremendous tension where the threat of war in the north now is quite strong. And you know, are we looking? How do we look? Do we look towards the future where, like the Rashbam? Do we think in the Rashbam terms, which is it's going to get it eventually has to get better. You have to heal from all of this, or do you look in Rashi terms, which is, yesterday was better, today is
I,
worse. It's going to
I
get worse.
think we have to look forward, because the problem with trying to go back to October 6th is it means October 7th will come again.
Yeah, yeah.
If we start with October 8th, we could try to imagine a world where October 7th doesn't come again. And I have thought for a long time that we simply don't know what the future will bring. That's just a reality of the lives that we live. But it's better to hope for the best, because come what may, we'll deal as best we can with whatever comes. But our attitude of hoping for the best can make the the present more bearable than if we think the worst is still to come.
Right.
That's a Shimon Peres line. Optimists and pessimists die the same way, but live very differently. Isn't that a
Right.
great line?
Yeah,
It's
it's a
great
brilliant
line.
line.
So bringing it back to the beginning, then there's a story. The story of the person coming to be a pilgrim is actually a person who is, I'm saying, is going to embrace the future. This person is in the present. But, forgive me for the Hallmark card here. He's holding on to the past and the future in the present. He is saying, this is where I came from. This is where I am now. And you know what? I'm going home, and I'm going home with joy. I'm going home after having given gratitude to God for bringing me to this place, for enabling me to reach this moment with my bountiful harvest, with my first fruits and my exaltation. And I'm gonna reap the rest of my field now. Let it be for good.
And
I
this
can-
is why it's a celebration of the first fruits and not the final harvest.
Amen. Yeah. Well, that's where we are. We are going to come to conclude. We're going to leave it there and let this parsha in all of its joy and its intensity kind of resonate for us in a period of time that is intense, very intense, both in the synagogue and the liturgical and the Jewish calendar, and of course in the Jewish world. We want to thank everyone for joining us, watching, listening. We have some devoted people who write to us, and can't tell you how much it means to us. Your comments and little emails about this. Thank you so much. We're praying for only good things. Let it be an easy week and a Shabbat Shalom to all. On behalf,
Shabbat Shalom.
take care. See you next week.